So good evening. Welcome to the Emma Goldman Awards ceremony, the second ceremony that we celebrate. And it is quite a nice feeling to be back at IWM with events taking place in presence of real people. I mean, most of us, I guess, by now have experienced a few of them before, but here for the Institute it is actually the first one. And as I said, this is the second Emma Goldman Awards ceremony. We had the first, the inaugural one, in February 2020. I still remember that very nicely. Not only because, I mean, very much so because of the speeches of that evening, of the very nice movie, of the audiovisual presentation on Emma Goldman that we saw that evening, but I also remember it because it was one of the very last events that we had here at the IWM, and we all didn't know what was to be expected for the month to come. Had we known that, we would have been maybe a bit less excited about it, but a very memorable evening, and this is the second ceremony. Very happy to be back for that. I am Ludger Hagedorn, permanent fellow here at the Institute for Human Sciences, the IWM. A warm welcome to all of you on behalf of the Institute and also on behalf of our acting rector, Ivan Vejvoda, who is right now today on his way back to Vienna. And a very special welcome for tonight goes especially to the Flex Foundation, who is behind the Emma Goldman Awards. And we're very happy, very proud that all three board members of the Flex Foundation are present here tonight. So a special welcome to you. Petra Meyer, this is the woman in the white shirt. Petra Meyer, who is a professor of political science at Antwerp University. To Jacqueline van der Pol. My Dutch is not perfect, but not that bad, I hope. Jacqueline van der Pol, a coach and consultant. And thirdly and lastly, and I will mention her again later, but also welcome to you, Mieke Verloo, a professor of comparative politics and inequality issues at Radboud University in Nijmegen. Nijmegen is the crucial differentiation between Dutch people and the rest of the world, because the rest of the world cannot pronounce it, and especially Germans, but we try. Okay, so we are very happy that all of you are here, and very many thanks to the Flex Foundation for being here. To the evening, we will have 2 speeches tonight to start the ceremony, and after these 2 speeches, we will proceed with Mieke Verloo. And Mieke Verloo will be the master of ceremony and tell you everything about the Emma Goldman Awards. This is not my job for tonight. A very special welcome also to the two speakers of tonight. The first one is Agata Lisiak, sitting here in the first row. Agata, we are very happy that you are back at the Institute. We are proud to say you're back because you were a fellow at the IWM in 2013-14 with a project on the image of women in visual representation of revolutions. That was your project at that time. From here on, you continued to the Humboldt University and had a research fellowship at the Humboldt University for 4 or 5 years. Very good. Almost close to the truth, yes. Almost. Agata is a migration studies professor today at Bard College in Berlin. She has her MA from Poznan, University of Economics and International Relations, later on made a PhD at the University of Halle in Germany in Media and Communication Studies. As I said, we are very, very happy, Agata, that you're back. Your work especially focuses on migration studies, urban sociology, one could say, and what you're particularly interested in is everyday urban encounters and imaginaries, feminist theory and practice as a broader background. And I just picked 2 of your many, many publications that somehow, for me, maybe you would have picked other ones, for me they were indicative and telling us a lot about what you're doing, what your work is about. I quote 2 articles, the first one from 2019, Urban Multiculture and Xenophonophobia, a very new word, Xenophonophobia in London and Berlin. And the second one 1 year earlier in 2018, Like Diamonds in the Sky, Imaginaries of Urban Girlhood. I find these are 2 quite indicative titles for what your work is on. Today, and that is what I'm very much looking forward to, you will be speaking about the politics of waywardness, a very special topic, the politics of waywardness, and especially dedicated to first Rosa Luxembourg and secondly to the name giver of our ceremony tonight, to Emma Goldman. Very warm welcome, Agata. The second speaker of tonight, who is not with us here in the room, unfortunately, is, yes, we can all wave, is Agwugo Emeyulu, who is a professor of sociology at Warwick University. She is, I think one can say this of many people, but I think especially so of Agwugo, she is an academic and an activist as well. Activism will also be the topic of her talk tonight. She will speak about the lonely activist. And as an activist, she's very much active outside, in and outside of university at both places. But as an academic and working at universities, Agwugo is constantly analyzing our Western society, most strongly so, one has to say, in the UK and the US, but analyzing Western societies in how it produces and reproduces inequalities on race, class, gender. This is the main focus of our work, with a strong emphasis, I would say, on women of color and their strategies for survival and for societal change. Also, in the case of Agwugo, I would like to just mention 2 publications, 2 recent publications. The first one, a book from 2009, a collective monograph entitled To Exist is to Resist. And I just mentioned the subtitle to it because I think the subtitle gives you already a very good idea of what the book is about. Black Feminism in Europe is the subtitle of that book. And secondly, to mention her latest publication that came out in 2021 with Silver Press, Fugitive Feminism is the title of that book. about, as the text says, black women's non-humanness. This is quite a strong claim, and a book that is dealing with the problem of how one can be oneself without being human. As I said, a very strong claim entailed in that book, Fugitive Feminism. Lastly, and then I will end, this is my biggest obligation, and also a lot of happiness included in that, is my task to welcome Mieke Verloo. Always there are people who have to make things go. We need people who make things moving forward. And I think very much so, this is Mieke Verloo, and a very, very special thank you to you, Mieke. Mieke is, as I mentioned before, a professor in Nijmegen. I just wanted to say the word again. But also a non-resident fellow here at the IWM. Very many years of happy cooperation we have had, Mieke. And though at the moment you're still not, you're not present here in Vienna any longer, but we very much appreciate the continuation of our common projects and of our common ideas, and this is a very good thing, I think, that what we are doing here. So thanks, Mieke, thanks to the Flex Foundation, thanks to all of you for being present with us tonight, and I will just end with a final word that has to do with Mieke, and then I will hand over to Agatha. Mieke, to me, I told her before, she knows about it, but I want to make it public. Mieke is the absolute and, I mean, uncontested world champion of acronyms. I don't know if you have noticed before, but the two research projects that Mieke was leading here at the IWM had the wonderful titles QUING and MAGIC. And you know what acronyms are. You find titles for research projects, and then you take just the first letters of every word, and the first letters should make something new somehow. I think in most cases it doesn't really work, and I have tried myself a few times, and it's a hard job. But Mieke, you're really the queen of QUING and MAGIC, and I very much admire you for that. And let me say, what the Emma Goldman Awards are to us, and why we are so happy to have them at the IWM, I think this is very much the same project. You have highly individualized projects, as you have highly individualized words, but all of them in the end somehow come together to something like the Emma Goldman project, the Emma Goldman Awards, and they form something new, something unique, and I would say something magic. Thank you.
Hi. You just tell me when to start. Yeah. Thank you, Ludger, for the very warm introduction. It's wonderful to be back at the Institute. Many thanks to Mieke for your invitation, and also thank you, Nikki and Sarah, for taking care of all the arrangements. I hope it's wonderful also to see everybody in person and some people on screen. I hope everyone has had a good summer. Mine was very quiet. I did a lot of reading. And one of the books I brought on my vacation was this one, was Kathy Gear's Knossos and the Prophets of Modernism, from which I learned that Heinrich Schliemann, the egomaniacal self-proclaimed discoverer of Troy, had to postpone his first expedition to what was to become the main excavation site because he was busy divorcing his recalcitrant Russian wife. I hope to find out more about the wife, whose name disappointingly never comes up in Gear's otherwise absorbing book, but her presence is limited to this one adjective, recalcitrant. I admit I didn't know the word, so I checked it up, and this is what I found. Recalcitrant, having an obstinately uncooperative attitude towards authority or discipline, defiant, difficult, rebellious, the opposite of compliant. In the next book I started reading, a very lengthy biography of Rosa Luxembourg, the author, J.P. Nettle, notes, perceptive members of the SPD in Germany ruefully came to envy their Austrian colleagues for their ability to manage their recalcitrant Poles. To be fair, in both these cases, recalcitrant does not seem to reflect the author's own judgments, but rather the attitudes of 19th century Westerners. Still, I wondered, is recalcitrant code for Eastern European? My suspicion intensified upon reading another book on Luxembourg, Jacqueline Rose's Women in Dark Times. Writing of Polish-Jewish relations in the aftermath of World War II, Rose observes that memory is defensive, recalcitrant. What is it about Eastern Europe, its inhabitants, its cultures, that inspires this view? Instead of rejecting it as grossly prejudiced, I'm interested in embracing recalcitrant as an affirming watchword that unlocks some key aspects of the lives and works of two Eastern European women and other women like them, who, it is safe to assume, were called or at least thought of as recalcitrant in their lifetimes. Emma Goldman and Rosa Luxemburg, born only a couple of years apart in the westernmost corners of the Russian Empire, were Eastern European, Jewish, female, and radical at a time that possessing even one of those characteristics was bound with struggle. And while thinking of them as recalcitrant may not seem particularly original because their defiance is by now legendary to the point of being commodified, I want to inspect this all too obvious label, treat it literally, and expose the political potential in recalcitrance. Both Goldman and Luxemburg were teenagers. Here are their pictures as teenagers when they emigrated from the Russian Empire. Goldman was one of the 2.5 million Eastern European Jews who arrived in the United States between 1881 and 1924, seeking to escape persecution and devastating poverty. Luxemburg had to flee Warsaw due to her political activities as a young socialist, and like many left-wing radicals of her time, initially settled in Zurich. It is arguably not despite, but because of their recalcitrance that Goldman and Luxemburg managed to establish themselves as key figures of respectively anarchism and revolutionary socialism in the West. A much overlooked trait of that many migrants share, after all, especially those with lived knowledges of various political and economic regimes, is a unique ability to question and subvert dominant narratives, normalized behaviors, and inherited values. As they, or we, disbelieve what has been internalized by the dominant society as a norm, conceive alternative approaches, and distrust all authority, migrants become recalcitrant. Goldman and Luxemburg were such migrants, and so were many others around them. But Migrationshintergrund was not a word yet, and nor was a hyphenated migrant identity a thing. They were foreigners, many times over, vilified, and in Goldman's case, actually deported on account of their national origin. Even if their lives were not framed explicitly as migrant at the time, their commitment to radically reimagining the world was enhanced by their own experiences of migration and exile. Goldman came to anarchism through a vibrant community of Russian, German, and Yiddish-speaking migrants occupying the tenements of the Lower East Side. Luxemburg polished her oratory and writing skills in cosmopolitan lecture halls, diasporic political salons, and at international congresses. The projects in which they believed, just as their lives, exceeded all imperial and national borders and fed off their deep conviction of the importance of internationalism. Fiercely independent thinkers, Goldman and Luxemburg cultivated the right to disagree with the prophets of their respective movements. A much-quoted line from Luxemburg's unfinished manuscript on the Russian Revolution reads, "Freedom is always the freedom of dissenters." She insisted that all invigorating healing and purifying aspects of political freedom depend on this essence. Luxemburg had little patience and very little respect for party opportunism, which she likened to a plant that grows in swamps, spreading quickly and luxuriantly in the stagnant water of the movement. The only means of fighting opportunism in a radical way, she urged, is to keep going forward revolutionary aspects of the movement. At least as much of a revolutionary, Goldman was not only deemed recalcitrant by her bourgeois detractors, including J. Edgar Hoover, who once called her the most dangerous woman in America, but also by her fellow anarchists, who repeatedly accused her of trivializing the cause. You may have heard that they scoffed at her dancing. As her biographer Vivian Gornick writes, Goldman hotly defended her need to define anarchism as she experienced it, with or without radical consensus. After all, what good was a revolution if at the end of the day one couldn't speak one's mind freely? Recalcitrance is Killjoy's cousin, and these women often called out their peers on their bullshit. Unsurprisingly, Goldman and Luxembourg appeared intense to their colleagues, especially to the male ideologues of their movements. They spoke their minds freely. They were difficult. They were also indispensable, however, as they attracted crowds and wrote fiery op-eds and sharp analyses by the ton. In today's era of peak popular feminism, recalcitrants such as Goldman or Luxembourg can easily be co-opted by consumer culture as figures of empowerment, edgy yet palatable role models, so-called rebel girls. Such heroic narratives reinforce the individualistic girl power paradigm and further obscure forms of resistance that are perhaps less obvious, yet nonetheless have potential for meaningful change and as such require our urgent attention. A heroic narrative does not allow for messiness. It shies away from contradiction, thwarts experimentation. It's a one-way street that ignores anything considered difficult or out of the way. In her gorgeous book, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, Saidiya Hartman lists wayward in the following family of words: errant, fugitive, recalcitrant, anarchic, willful, reckless, troublesome, riotous, tumultuous, rebellious, and wild. With path-breaking scholarship, Hartman's book recreates the radical imagination and wayward practices of young Black women living in New York City and Philadelphia at the turn of the 20th century by describing the world through their eyes. Hartman counter-narrates what she calls a revolution in a minor key, and argues compellingly that young Black women were radical thinkers who tirelessly imagined other ways to live and never failed to consider how the world might be otherwise. These riotous Black girls, troublesome women, and queer radicals, whose intimate histories Hartman inventively uncovers, were Goldman and Luxembourg's contemporaries. Unlike those two, however, the struggle of Hartman's protagonists was one without formal declarations of policy, slogan, or credo. It required no party platform or 10-point program. Walking through the streets of New York, she and Emma Goldman crossed paths but failed to recognize each other. Yet, despite this apparent misrecognition, Hartman sees important similarities between them and even quotes Luxembourg to argue that those wayward Black women and girls understood profoundly that experience was capable of opening up new ways, yielding 1,000 new forms and improvisations. Luxembourg continued that thought enthusiastically. Uninhibited, effervescent life contains creative power and corrects all mistakes. The public life of states where freedom is restricted is so meager, so miserable, so schematic, and so sterile, precisely because by excluding democracy, it occludes the living source of all intellectual wealth and progress. To Hartman, waywardness is a practice of possibility at a time when all roads, except the ones created by smashing out, are foreclosed. In the untiring practice of trying to live when you were never meant to survive. Waywardness is a practice that Goldman and Luxembourg inhabited on their soapboxes as much as in their bedrooms. It is also a practice they openly advocated. Goldman saw the spirit of unquestioning obedience so powerfully drilled into children, women, workers, and soldiers as the true enemy of humanity. When, in the course of human development, existing institutions prove inadequate to the needs of man, when they serve merely to enslave, rob, and oppress mankind, the people have the eternal right to rebel against and overthrow these institutions. Luxembourg avidly rejected the social democratic dogmas of her time that were saturated in elitist distrust of the masses and argued for mass strike as the most powerful weapon of the struggle for political rights. Even more shockingly, Luxembourg persistently objected to Polish self-determination, a cause supported even by Marx and Engels. Less controversially from today's perspective, both Luxembourg and Goldman fiercely opposed war and were both imprisoned for their uncompromising stance. The two never met. When Luxembourg was murdered in Berlin in January 1919, Goldman was still in prison, charged with conspiracy to induce persons not to register for war. Despite their many political differences, let's not forget that anarchists and socialists were not exactly friends, Luxembourg's death shook Goldman. "Oh, the cruel irony of the shades of Marx," she later wrote in her memoir. Luxembourg and Liebknecht, who had helped to build up the Socialist Party of Germany, were crushed by the regime of the Orthodox comrades risen to power. In the early 1920s, Goldman briefly lived in Berlin within a walking distance from Luxembourg's old neighborhood in Friedenau. One day on the subway, Goldman encountered two reactionary nationalist elements, as she called them, who were railing against the verdammte Juden as idle vampires and the cause of the ruin of the fatherland. I listened for a while and then remarked that they were talking nonsense. As the train reached my station and I alighted, they shouted after me, "Wait till things change and we'll fix such as you just as we did Rosa Luxemburg." Goldman left Berlin soon after that incident because, as a foreigner, she had no right to publicly express opinions in the Weimar Republic. It was not a matter of mere arrest. It meant expulsion. There was apparently no other country willing to let me in, so I thought I might try Austria. Again, like his tribe in other lands, the Austrian Minister of Foreign Affairs signified his readiness to admit me, but on the condition that I abstain from all political activity. Naturally, I refused. In one of those books I read this summer, Women in Dark Times, Jacqueline Rose follows the paths of individual women who have taught her how to think differently and who can help us forge a new language for feminism. Rosa Luxemburg is one of the women Rose credits with exposing everything that is darkest, most recalcitrant, in unsettling in the struggle for the better political future we want to build for ourselves. Here it is again, recalcitrant. This time, however, the adjective describes not those who defiantly struggle to radically reimagine the world, but rather the world itself, a world that is recalcitrant to our will. Recalcitrant comes from the Latin word calcitrare, to kick. But who's kicking who? Goldman, Luxembourg, Hartmann's wayward revolutionaries in a minor key, all of them were kicked repeatedly by oppressive systems, the patriarchy, racism, capitalism, nationalism, yet daringly, they kicked back. Undoubtedly, they were bold individuals, but as they demonstrated in theory and practice, anyone could and should kick back with whatever tools at their disposal and in whatever manner they choose, fiercely, nonchalantly, or methodically. For these women, and hopefully for you too, recalcitrance was a practice that fueled their politics, shaped their relationships, and made the dark times more livable. Thank you.
So I'm up next. I don't get a little introduction. I'm just wondering, do I just get into it? All right, I'm going to get into it. Well, there are a couple things first, and I'm going to share my screen. First of all, I'd like to thank Mickey, Nicola, the Flax Foundation, the Institute staff for kind of organizing this event and for the invitation to speak this evening. So thank you so much. And I also just want to say congratulations to the awardees. This is really exciting for you guys. And I was there back in 2020, getting an award. So I'm really happy for you. And for those of you that I actually know, Dominique, Rosalind, Stephanie. I'm very proud of you, so well done. It's very exciting. And I just want to apologize. I'm sorry that I can't be there. I got my second COVID vaccination Monday last week, and I have not recovered since. I'm still very ill. And so I'm sorry that I can't be there. And so if I'm a little rusty in my presentation, because I got to kind of set the standard. So please forgive me, kind of thing. And just by the way, I don't read those kinds of books when I'm on holiday. I read like a bunch of like embarrassing beach reads. So I need to kind of get it together in terms of what I'm reading on my holidays, but that's another story. All right. I'm going to share my screen and then we're going to get started. I can't believe she's out here reading Jacqueline Rose on her holiday. What is this? All right. Okay, you can see my screen, right? Okay, let me just get started here. You guys, can I get a quick little thumbs up if you can see my screen and you can still see me? Okay, thank you. All right, so what the title of my talk is The Lonely Activist, and this is based on the project Women of Color Resist, which is an Open Society Foundation project, of which the wonderful Dominique Hansel was one of our researchers. So that, and maybe get kind of a view from the ground about what it was like working on this project and what it's like to work with me, actually. You can speak to Dominique about that. So what I'm going to do, I only have 20 minutes, so I don't have a lot of time, but what I want to do is talk a little bit about what it means to have precarity encoded onto the minds and bodies of women of color activists and what that means. I got to kind of left us on kind of a hopeful note, and I'm going to make sure to kind of bring you guys back into darkness a wee bit. So this, I don't know if this will be necessarily uplifting, but it may well be enlightening for you. So the first thing I'm going to do is give you a little bit of background on the project, talk about methods. Then I'm going to move on to talk about the framework for understanding the data, which is this idea of loneliness as precarity. And then I'll just show you just a little bit of some of the data that was gathered by our fabulous research assistants. And I forgot to ask if I'm going to get questions or not. I don't think I am, but if you have further questions, you can either send me an email or actually ask Dominique, although I don't think she's actually seen this presentation. So anyway, let's get started. The context for the research is this, and this is Women of Color Resist is essentially the third iteration of a long-running project that Leah Bassel, who's my co-principal investigator, and I have been running since the 2008 economic crisis, which is trying to understand how the economic crisis and subsequent austerity measures, which is just tax increases and cuts to public spending, and hence the rollback of European welfare states, what that means for the lives of women of color. We want to understand the racialized, gendered, and class effects of the withdrawal of welfare state services. And then added to that, then layered on to this kind of foundational catastrophe is that of the ongoing migration crisis, the Mediterranean crisis, since about 2011. And although it doesn't kind of have the same kind of headlines that it used to at the height of the crisis, what we know, of course, are people are still drowning in the Mediterranean. And I think it's important to note that this is European Union policy. This is the policy of the European Union to push back small boats, to criminalize charity workers who are seeking to kind of save people, to ensure that they do not reach European shores. And so that sets the standard for what migration policy then looks like across the European Union. And then finally, we talk about the triumph of the far right. When I first started these projects exploring the rollback of the welfare state in 2008, I used to talk about the rise of the far right. Then it was the rise of the far right. Then it was the normalization of the far right. And now I think it's not hyperbolic to talk about the triumph of the far right in terms of how both mainline left and right parties have co-opted the language and practices of the far right. But then, of course, in terms of popular discourse, we talk about the ways, just thinking about the ways in which ideas of kind of wokeness, cancel culture, this kind of panic on critical race theory, and in the French context, the panic about intersectionality, all of that has circulated from the far right and has gone mainstream. And if that is not a triumph, I don't know what is. And so given this situation, Leah and I wanted to understand how are women of color organizing, how are women of color activists organizing and mobilizing in the midst of this multi-headed catastrophe. I'm all worked up. Even though I thought I was a little weak, I'm getting all worked up. All right. Just very briefly on methods, and then we'll get to the fun stuff. So in terms of methods, we undertook field work. We had 6 wonderful research assistants who undertook field work in 6 countries, but really these cities, London, Paris, Brussels, Madrid, Copenhagen, and Berlin from 2019 to 2020. And it was just our luck that our field work finished up right at the start of the pandemic. So we were able to finish up all of our field work, which included 167 one-to-one semi-structured interviews with activists, both activist leaders, as well as rank and file folks, participant observations of lobbying, of protests, of organizer meetings to understand strategies and tactics, to understand successes and failures, as well as analyzing activist social media activity, particularly on Twitter and Instagram, trying to capture the ephemeral conversations that took place amongst activists, especially using the features, especially on Instagram, where kind of messages self-delete after 24 hours was very interesting and very challenging. So it was really interesting. So when we talk about women of color, for the purposes of this project, we mean cis and trans women and non-binary femmes who experience this processes of racialization. And we're talking about activists, even though we spoke to activists across a range of contexts, folks working in the arts, working in the museum sector, trade unions, social services, mutual aid, self-help. What they all had in common is that they were working on issues to do with organizing against austerity, against the far right, and for migrants' rights. So what I want to do is just spend a little bit of time talking about this framework for understanding at least some of the data that that Lee and I have been kind of analyzing over the last year or so under kind of lockdown conditions, which hasn't been great. And that's really to kind of think about this idea of loneliness as precarity. And so I think I mentioned previously that when studying kind of women of color's activism, I've always been interested in understanding failure, because people learn best through failure, but also most activists often fail in what they're doing, right? Their campaign doesn't reach its goals. There's kind of infighting. People, all kind of people leave the scene for various reasons. So trying to understand how and why things go wrong is kind of standard practice for the work that I've been doing since 2008. But I suppose what's been very interesting in terms of analyzing the data from this project is I think Leah and I were both surprised to see so much discussion about pessimism and defeat from activists. And that's something very different. So understanding failure under kind of quote normal times is, straightforward. This is, your opponents were too powerful, you weren't able to shape public opinion, political opportunity structures have closed, all those kinds of things. But this is something qualitatively and fundamentally different in terms of talking about being pessimistic about the future, because by the very nature of being an activist means that you kind of through your own labor, but also the collective labor of your comrades, that if you come together, you work hard, all the rest of it, maybe some kind of change will happen. Maybe not in your lifetime, maybe not in the first 6, 12, 9 months, but change is on the horizon, perhaps not for you, but maybe for the next generation. And at least looking across the data across these 6 sites, we didn't see that. And I was surprised and interested in trying to understand what's going on here in terms of these negative feelings about the present, but also about the future. And so I think it's probably worth us thinking about not just what activists are doing, but how they're feeling about their kind of economic and social position, and what that means in relation to almost permanent precarity, which actually predates 2008. But with so many of the activists, they're absolute youngsters. So the context of austerity has been kind of ever present in their lives, which I think is very interesting. So trying to think about kind of the emotional lives of activists has been very interesting, because I know you guys are probably thinking, oh, she's going to draw on the late Lauren Berlant or maybe Sarah Ahmed and all the rest of it. And I have to admit, I'm a little skeptical about these kinds of focus, this focus on this frame of thinking about kind of emotions, because I think, well, maybe not so much Sarah Ahmed, but Lauren Berlant, in particular, was not very good at thinking about other people's emotions besides white women. And that's not a great framework for thinking about what's going on here with activists. And I think we should look differently about thinking about activist emotions. And so, but I'll get into that. When we think about loneliness, it's probably surprising to put that in the same context of activists, because by the very nature of being an activist, what it means is you're around lots of different kinds of people, right? You're out here, you're building community, you're building solidarity, you're surrounded by people, maybe not necessarily people that you particularly like or you get on with, but you kind of, you grit your teeth and you kind of work collectively with lots of different kinds of personalities in order to make some kind of change. So whilst the coming together in collective spaces might be frustrating and aggravating and annoying, it shouldn't necessarily be lonely. And I suppose that's what's been striking to us about looking at this data. But I think if we can think about loneliness differently, that maybe opens up some ideas of thinking about what's going on with these activists. So we oftentimes think about loneliness in terms of isolation. And I think that's partly right, but I do think we have to kind of shift our understanding of what loneliness is in practice, especially amongst activists, to think about this idea of the social pain of dislocation. And so this idea of feeling negated by the broader community and the broader society, the idea of feeling abstracted from and accepted from these spaces. And so whilst you may well be surrounded by your comrades in arms, that does not necessarily fulfill the function of feeling abstracted and from your kind of immediate surroundings. And so we found that was very helpful to try to understand how and why we found activists, regardless of the context, whether they were in Berlin or London or Madrid, we found them teetering on the brink of burnout and breakdown. Because what we found was that the level of precarity that activists were experiencing in their daily lives, insecure housing, stitching together a range of temporary part-time jobs with no labor rights, the feeling this kind of ontological and epistemic insecurity. So kind of, when Agata was talking about kind of Emma Goldman experiencing kind of this this anti-Semitism on the underground, we have activists, that just struck me about, the activists in Copenhagen having kind of some of the leaders of the far right come to their door and harassing them at their homes, right? And people getting spat at on the street and, having to kind of run away from kind of alternative from Deutschland activists who are roaming the streets. So we're kind of in similar times, unfortunately. And we found that thinking about that kind of ontological but epistemic insecurity is an important way of supplementing this idea of precarity, which leads to this idea of loneliness, not in terms of isolation, but in terms of this idea of feeling dislocated from your community, but also from your country. And what we found also as a result of that is this constant state of emotional, economic, and epistemic insecurity is fraying the bonds, the solidaristic bonds between activists. We're not saying that solidarity doesn't happen. We're not saying that coalition work doesn't happen. It happens in spite of this and through Herculean efforts of activists to kind of overcome this and to overcome these precarious bonds between themselves. So I'm going to show you 3 examples. Normally, I would like to show you 6 so you can get a sense of the different nuances and permutations across the different research sites. But I'll just show you 3 because I only have 20 minutes, and then we'll wrap it up. So I'm going to show you what kind of loneliness precarity looks like. So this is actually an interview that the wonderful Dominique Hansel conducted with an activist in Berlin. And so this is an example of what it means to survive or to live through institutionalized precarity. And so this is a Black migrant woman working for a very high profile anti-racist organization or network in Berlin. And so she says this, quote, "So all the shit that Black people experience in Germany is in our email inbox. And then it's just like me thinking, actually, I want to help all these people. I want to give them something somehow, like give them a structure with which they can work or get access to something. But I don't have that myself, then you have to accept that you just can't help all of them. We can't replace a state institution. I'm feeling so hopeless at the moment. I'm so pessimistic about everything. And so that quote is kind of depressing on lots of different levels, kind of thing. But I think is foundational to understanding. It's certainly this moment in time, but I think also something that is new, at least new to Leah and I, who have been kind of working in this area for a hot minute now. And I think what's interesting, as I say, that solidarity is still there. So this activist is saying she's getting overwhelmed by pleas of help from Black folks all over Germany who are looking for kind of financial support, but also emotional support and other kinds of support in order to kind of get through these kind of tough times, especially in 2019. This was a moment of a real uptick in street violence by kind of far right groups, in particular in Germany at this time. So you see this desire to reach out and to kind of help and to do things in terms of organizing self-help and mutual aid. But what you also see is this activist kind of ground down by her own economic conditions, by the immediate material conditions in which she's living. And she goes on to talk about later on in this interview how she's dealing with insecure housing, and it's really difficult to get activists to kind of stay involved with the project because everyone is stitching together all of these temporary part-time jobs and all the rest of it. And so you can see how this kind of is fraying these bonds, but also kind of robs people of their futures, right? It's, who knows? Maybe this was just a particularly bad day for her, but I kind of doubt it, because what we see is this kind of repeated across different activists in different contexts, saying very, very similar things about the material conditions of precarity are undermining the ability to do the kind of efficacious solidarity work that they would like. So let me give you a second example, which is slightly different, but it was that same but different, which I think is very interesting. So this interview was conducted by our research assistant, Nadia Nadesan, who's in Madrid. And so this is, I think, a really interesting example of, you can see where kind of the roots of a lot of the newish decolonization work, where it comes from, but then also how there's something fundamentally unresolvable to the activism, which kind of creates a sense of insecurity. So this is a Black trans Latin American migrant who says this, quote, "In Madrid, I connected with transgender migrants making this crossing between sexual dissidence and migration, refuge and asylum. It is the Spanish state's responsibility to compensate us. The reparation and the historical responsibility in the present that the white institution has to redistribute and return everything that was taken from us, which will never be repaired, but this will always be present. A Black Brazilian friend always says, this is the unpayable debt." And I just think that's a fantastic quote, and what an amazing activist, right? And I just think if we can hold on to this idea, this unpayable debt, the unpayable debt of colonial plunder, which can never be resolved, right? The Spanish state is broke, can't even look after its own citizens, much less repay the debt of its own kind of colonial plunder. And it's kind of a never-ending, exhausting kind of activism, right? In order to kind of restore this 500-year colonial wrong that has taken place. And I suppose what's interesting about this activist and some of the work that she's doing is that whilst people are working to kind of hold the Spanish state to account in terms of thinking about reparations to Latin America, but also doing right by kind of Latin American refugees and migrants who are in the country at the moment, what we also see is this kind of turn away from a lot of public-facing activism, and kind of more turns inward to what we see as the rise of this kind of pleasure activism, which is focused on when you have a state that is so closed to you, that is not open to any kind of means of persuasion, lobbying, any kind of movement, then what happens is you turn inwards, right? And especially for kind of these Black and brown trans activists, what we see is a focus on kind of creating kind of spaces for joy, for safety, for desirous play, which I think is very interesting, which is oftentimes why you see this activism under the radar. It's very hard to see and hard to find because it's made deliberately so, because these spaces, because one feels so epistemically and ontologically insecure in public spaces, you go on to create your own private spaces with new kinds of family and friendship formations. So one last thing, on precarious bonds. So kind of a real indictment on solidarity politics. So as I say, kind of Leah and I have been in this game for a minute. And so these kinds of quotes, this is something that we've seen consistently since 2008 and doing this kind of work. So this might be the ones that are kind of probably most familiar to you. So this is an interview conducted by our research assistant who's in Brussels and also did some work in Antwerp, Nicole Gregoire, who did a lot of very interesting work amongst queer migrant groups in these two cities. And this is what this activist woman has to say about what it means to try to forge bonds within already minoritized groups. So she says this, quote, "There's still racism within the LGBTQI community, and it's ridiculous for me. How can you be an oppressed community and be an oppressor yourself?" So it strikes me that solidarity is very difficult. Unless people are trying to hook up with Black people, which by she means kind of have sex with, unless people are trying to hook up with Black people, that's when they'll pretend to be allies. But other than that, it's very difficult to be in solidarity. The trust is really broken, because we're thinking, are you really an ally? And so this is something that you see again and again across time, across space, across activist area, again and again, that regardless of particularly Black women, what Black women are doing and where they are and all the rest of it, what you see is this kind of failure to connect with broader groups, because these groups refuse to kind of see and take seriously issues of racism and white supremacy. And hopefully this will not be news to you guys. So I don't want to kind of beat the dead horse with regards to this, but you can see how this generates then these kind of a sense of precarity and loneliness, because as we say, if you're out and you're on and if you can't find a home within your queer community, then where can actually you find it, right? And I think that says something really important about how that loneliness is so intertwined with this idea of precarity. All right, time for me to wrap up because I'm sure it's been 20 minutes. We know that women of color activists are exhausted, they're burnt out, and they're lonely. And they're feeling this way for a number of different reasons, but mostly because of this multi-pronged crisis that is simultaneous and never ending. And in fact, and horrifying to say, it is getting worse and worse and worse. And I suppose that's what's so kind of terrifying about this moment, as we kind of see this slide of this kind of descent into, not collective madness, but certainly something. And I think it's important for us to take the emotional turmoil of activists seriously and understanding its material and discursive elements, and how, if we take seriously the issue of precarity, how it's generated, the many different ways in which it's generated, that gets us to a really interesting starting point for thinking differently about how we might define, redefine, and practice solidarity. I think it's important for us to understand that loneliness is not just an individualized response to bad times, but this loneliness is a structure. It's a structure of the economic system. It's a structure of white supremacy. It's a structure of patriarchal oppression. It's a structure of queerphobia, transphobia, homophobia. And I think it's important for us, if we're serious about thinking differently about solidarity, then we have to kind of, we can't shy away from these structures that infect not just the broader society, but also in our so-called radical and revolutionary spaces. Thank you.
Yeah. Now I don't see Akugo anymore, and I want to say thank you. Thank you. She's still there, right, Nikki?
I'm still here. You're welcome.
Yeah. So, this thing needs to be like that. Okay. So I think we had two great presentations. It would have been good to have two very positively inclined presentations, but the times are just not good for that, because these are tough times. And I think most of us recognize the truth underneath what has been said just now. And we're here together because we have to celebrate that against all odds, even in and around academia, in academia as it should be, and around it, people resist, people take action. People continue to try and understand things that other people dismiss as not really important. People try and create knowledge that actually can be used to change society for the good, right? And we're here to celebrate some of the people that make that happen, so that we have moments of joy to know that, you know, we can all borrow from that. These people can grow from that, we hope, from the awards that they're given by the Flax Foundation. And unfortunately, academia especially is not the right place that is trying to foster and fertilize this type of knowledge. On the contrary, I mean, this is part of my own expertise to look at the politics of knowledge in academia and how the far right is actually trying to push all that out. We've seen concrete experiences in countries that set up new far right knowledge institutions or that try to push critical thinking out. And this is only increasing. Our own work is started in 2013 on that, and it's increasing by the minute, more or less. So we're in this for the long haul in all these struggles. But even if there is so much loneliness, we're not in this alone, I think. So we have to celebrate this, and we have to celebrate the resilience and the engagement and the commitment of the people that continue to do this and to create knowledge that actually is for the good of society. So that's part of what the Flax Foundation wants to do. So we have two types of awards for those people that don't really know this. We have big Emma Goldman Awards that will be presented today, 7 new people. And those people can also nominate a Snowball Award, so that the Flax Foundation is increasing its networks and its reach. And so I will start with those Snowball Awards. The people that are here are not all of them. I think, Nikki, maybe you can put up the Flax Foundation website with the 7 pictures. They're not all here tonight. I think political situations and COVID situations interfere. The people that aren't here are, 2 of them are not from the European Union, and the European Union is making bigger trouble to let these people enter under these conditions. And one of them was another problem. But these 2 that are not from the European Union, they're on your screen, and I'll introduce them shortly after that. So I will present the Snowball awardees first. They will come up and then get an award from me. And I will ask my charming assistant Petra to come and give them to me. Their names are on the envelope. And they are, if the first one is saying Ian, then they're in the correct order. And I mean, that should be okay. And then if I run out of awards, I will ask for the next ones. No? So, yeah. I think I start with the people that are here, and then we move to the website to properly introduce also the people that aren't, that couldn't be here. So present with us, and in alphabetical order, this time we did it by last name. Last year we did it by first name. We mix up the stuff. We try to be a little bit, playful in this. So I start with Ian de la Rosa. Ian, can you come? Ian, it's a pleasure to give you this award, and you know why you got it, but I'll tell the people. right? So Ian is award-winning filmmaker. And he's nominated by Lucas Platero, who was one of the awardees last year. Ian de la Rosa is the director of the short film Victor XX, which won more than 18 awards, including at the Cannes Film Festival in the Cine Foundation section. And from there, they wrote a variety of other projects. So recently, they were part of a screenwriter teams on the major miniseries Veneno, which is a biopic about Spanish transgender icon La Veneno. And De La Rosa tells the story about 4 teenagers that are proud of their roots, which are a blend of Moroccan and Spanish cultures. And during 2021, so now, right, they're going to start their masters.
Yeah.
So you did?
Next month.
Next month, okay, that's good. Yeah, I mean, okay. So, currently they're seeking for funding for their feature film Aceitunas, and we all know that those are olives, right? Good tourist language skills. About a trans man who returns to his village to give birth. So they are seeking for funding for their feature film. So it's always good. There's people listening. I mean, you never know, right? Ian, it's a pleasure on behalf of the foundation to give you this small but significant little snowball award. Yes. Yes. I mean, I can recommend later when you're, grown up or something, which I also hope to do at some point in time. You can do this kind of presentations and be very enthusiastic about all the people that you're actually very enthusiastic about. So the next one that I'm very enthusiastic about is Clarisse Gargaard from the Netherlands. So could you? Oh. Okay. So, I'm from the Netherlands. Clarisse is from the Netherlands. So for me, she's a famous TV and newspaper journalist, writer, filmmaker, and activist, although for most of you, maybe she isn't famous yet. No? She was nominated. I mean, it's only 2 minutes, Clarisse. It's only 2 minutes. So she was nominated by Amat Macharek, one of last year's Emma Goldman awardees, for her hope-inspiring work as a TV and newspaper journalist. And hope-inspiring, you see? That's like the contrapoint of what we heard, right? She's based in the Netherlands, and she also published a memoir called Dragon's Daughter, about the Liberian civil wars and her father, who worked alongside dictator Charles Taylor, diving into that painful family history, right? In that same year, she also gave a speech on women's rights and the importance of systemic change as the Dutch women's representative at the United Nations General Assembly. So aside for her work as a TV presenter and editor, she's also contributed to Vogue. See? The Institute, Vogue. See who we bring? Contributors to Vogue. Vice, South African talk radio, The Correspondent, Vrij Nederland, Afropunk. And she writes a bi-weekly column that I always read with great pleasure in my newspaper, the NRC, often tackling thorny issues of social injustice, resistance, and racism. And together with Hasna Al-Maroudi, she's a co-founder of the feminist multimedia platform Lilith. And I firmly recommend you to check that out because it's beautiful on top of good, right? Because beauty is a thing with you, right?
Why not?
Why not, exactly. So, well, I don't know if this is beautiful enough for you, but that's the award we have. And yeah, okay. So, congratulations. Okay, we're good. Next up, Dominique. You have been mentioned already. Okay. Dominique Hansel is an independent. That's not recalcitrant, no? Independent? Could be, no? Academic, writer, and editor in Germany. And she was nominated by Agogo Emayulu, who has mentioned her name. Did you listen? Yeah? Okay. For her impressive work as both an academic and an independent writer and editor. She's based in Berlin and earned her PhD from the Vrije Universiteit's Graduate School of North American Studies. And with a dissertation on contemporary Afro-diasporic literatures. And she's the acting editor-in-chief of Germany's leading feminist magazine, Missy, where she has been writing about music, literature, cinema, art. So beauty is a thing, no? Somehow, yes. And all its political and Afro-feminist intersections since 2011 already, no? Her monograph, Making Black History, Diasporic Fiction in the Moment of Afropolitanism, is forthcoming with de Gruyter. Okay, good. So it's just a tip for the library, right? She's currently working on a hybrid memoir about being Afro-German that also tackles the history of German colonialism and her family's relationship to German colonial Africa. So, Dominique Hansel, on behalf of the Flax Foundation, we're extremely happy to have you here and to give you this small snowball. Well, Dorothea, you saw this coming. It's your turn, right? Yeah, later you can do mentorship of people, if you get an award, how you deal with that all stuff, you know? I think that's always a very practical skill to have. No? If you're inclined in doing stuff that makes you get awards in the end. So Dorothea Redai is an independent scholar and activist from Hungary. And she was nominated by Andrea Crisan, one of last year's awardees, for her interdisciplinary and unwavering work as an independent scholar and activist working on gender in education. She's based in Budapest, got a PhD from CU in 2015, and her book, Exploring Sexuality in Schools, The Intersectional Reproduction of Inequality, was published by Palgrave in 2019. Since 2015, you've worked as a researcher, as a trainer in international educational research and development projects at CU, but also at other organizations, at ELTE and at Anthropolis Association. She's now at the CU Democracy Institute. And besides her academic activities, you will hear that phrase a lot, no? Academic, and then beside the academic activities, she works as a trainer in the school program Getting to Know LGBT People in Hungary. Did you notice the latest policies? No? Currently, as the coordinator of the successful book project, Wonderful Wonderland is for Everyone. You can say the Hungarian title now. Okay. Which has faced vicious attacks by right-wing political actors, but maybe for that also is becoming even more famous. And
it will be published in 8 European languages.
Yeah. So that's really good. So I think these current times are especially hard in Hungary. I know that, and so I hope that this little snowball can do something to make you feel happy when you look at it. Yeah, so. I'm moving to the people that are not here and not even on the Zoom. So if I can first have the picture of Dani on the Flax website, would that be possible? Or shall I start with Fabio first? Is that easier? Yeah, I do that. Okay. So this is Fabio. Fabio Andres Diaz Pabon. With us from South Africa, where he is currently and will maybe remain for a while if the European Union keeps its wonderful policies. He was nominated by Rosa Chicha for his transdisciplinary and prolific work as a political scientist and as a public intellectual. He has 3 academic affiliations, one at the ISS in The Hague, it's in Rotterdam now, in the Netherlands, one at University of Cape Town in South Africa, and one at Rhodes University in South Africa, right? And his PhD research was on social movements and protests in Colombia and South Africa and their relation to other forms of conflict. So there is a book from that. It's called Truth, Justice and Reconciliation in Colombia, Transitioning from Violence. And since then he has published widely on inequality from a political economy perspective, including on the effects of the pandemic. And he's also engaging with a wide variety of social movements, including organizations in Colombia that work on promoting peace and justice. And you are from Colombia originally, right? Yeah. And with civil society organizations that hold public officials to account for public expenditure and service delivery in Southern Africa. Fabio, I left it at home because I knew I couldn't give it through the screen. So but we'll send it to you, promise, right? It exists.
I trust you.
It's a material proof that that will come to you. We'll be in touch, like where exactly to send it to. And so I moved to Nasta Mancevic on top, smiling on top. Nasta, it's a pleasure to have you here. And those of you who don't know Nasta, Nasta is a feminist and queer activist, poet, translator, and journalist in Belarus. And Nasta was nominated by Marta Ralusko, one of the last year's awardees, for their multifaceted and inspirational work as a feminist and queer activist. Based in Minsk, in Belarus, they published their first collection of poetry and short prose in 2012, and 2 years later, 2014, co-founded Make Out, which is a feminist non-hierarchical project on gender and sexuality. For which they research and map LGTB histories across Belarus, collecting both experiences of violence and discrimination, as well as of creativity and joy. Though Belarus has no formalized programs on gender studies, Mancevic has done outstanding ethnographic work on essential feminist and queer categories such as the body, gender transition, violence, masculinity, parenthood, polygamy, activism, all in the Belarusian context. Mancevic, they are also the Belarusian translator of Alok Vait Menon, an Indian American, I don't know if I pronounced her name right, Indian American writer and gender non-conforming activist. Nasta, we will send this award to you, or we hope you can come and pick it up at some point. No? That's the same for you, Fabio, if you're so nodding so enthusiastically. So congratulations on the award. It's very well deserved, and we will all send you our best wishes for Belarus and for you, right? Yeah. So unfortunately not here is Dani Corbello, a trans artist and activist from the Canary Islands in Spain, also nominated by Lucas Platero. You maybe notice I mentioned Lucas Platero before, and I said also that awardees could nominate a Snowball awardee, but Lucas couldn't make a choice between Ian and Dani, so we've split the award. And with the agreement of everyone. And so Dani was born in Tenerife and their way of creating and reflecting is very much linked to the current history and situation of the Canary Islands. Dani graduated in fine arts at 2017 in the University of La Laguna in Tenerife, and is combining a master degree in gender studies and equality practices there too with their trans activism and artistic practice. This artistic practice is also about the archaeology of an identity, and this includes a documentary film collecting memories from Canary people who were oppressed under the Franco regime for their sexuality and gender expression. This film is titled Isolated Memories, but they are also doing performances, zines, collaborations, manifestos, workshops, and short films. And I think this is the reason that Dani is not here, because there was a mix of personal things that were sitting in the way and work things. So Dani will get the award also, and if Dani is watching, then let's applaud, right? Okay, so Peter, I need the other awards also, right? Because we move to the... It's doable, right? You're not all thinking, where is the drinks, where is the food, no? You're curious, who are the awardees of this year? Okay, this is good. This is good, because there's 7 of them. Last year there were 6, this year we found 7. No reason to then throw one out, right? So we found 7, and we do them in alphabetical order. Again, that this is like so that everyone can frantically think, am I the first then? Meraf, you're right. You are the first, so please come up. Okay. This is Meraf Amir, proudly presenting on behalf of the Flax Foundation. Senior lecturer and research fellow at Queen's University in Belfast. With the people that are coming now, you have to think it's a selection, right? If you want to know more about these people, do dive in the internet and all resources you can find. This is the same for the Snowball awardees. It's always a short idea that you get an idea, what kind of people are these? Meraf Amir's work is strongly based in cultural and social geography, but it extends far beyond it. And while she has a particular interest in critical perspectives on security, processes of border making, geographies of identities and embodiment, feminist and queer theory, and she has regional expertise on the so-called Israel-Palestine conflict, right? Yeah, but it's called like that. In my newspaper, they keep calling it like that. So, but her early work, I will come back to that. But her early work is different. This work was on the development of new reproductive technologies, in which she carefully unpacked the emergence of the discourse of the biological clock. Now, there might still be people in the audience who think there is a biological clock. But thanks to scholars like Meraf, we know that this discourse actually happened at some time. And before that, it did not exist. So it's always good to map this kind of stuff. This year, there is a new book coming with Duke University Press on futureless geographies. And I think this book is about...
It's an Israel-Palestine.
Exactly. On this...
Colonial setting.
Okay, good. Yeah. She's also involved in a collaborative project on the use of torture. I mean, next year, promise the Flax Foundation will find people that do, you know, I don't know, other things than this hard stuff that is part of our world, right? But it isn't like that. So a collaborative project on the use of torture as a political colonial technology of population control with the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel. She's a highly committed long-time activist with several feminist anti-occupation organizations in Israel, and also with the trade union at her university in Belfast, pushing for equality-driven work environment during the pandemic. Is that you? Yeah. Yes? Yeah, it's important to have some confirmation. Here's your award. Yeah, right name, good. Congratulations. Yeah, we have people here that after the A comes the B, right? So Stephanie Bulilla is next. And you will notice a couple of like patterns, right? Like having more than one job is definitely a pattern across all these awardees. So Stephanie Bulilla is a lecturer at Lucerne University of Applied Sciences and Art and visiting lecturer at the University of Applied Sciences and Art of Western Switzerland, Valais. Right? So she's trained in sociology and gender studies, but covered a lot of ground in her research, teaching and organizing work so far, moving across Europe too, from Switzerland to the UK to Germany and back to Switzerland and in between to New York, I think. Or was that before? No? Okay. Her 2 books show the wide scope of her engagement. While the first one, very apt for the Emma Goldman Award, I think, is on dancing salsa in post-thinking Europe, gender and sexuality discourses among salsa dancers in Switzerland and England. Her recent book is called Race in Post-Racial Europe, an Intersectional Analysis. And I didn't read the salsa book, but I definitely read the other book, and I think it's very good. Since 2020, she's teaching on community development, social work at Lucerne University. She has a vast teaching record on gender, on social work, international development, anti-racism, cultural studies, critical diversity studies, queer studies, feminist theory. I'm just picking a few things, right? She's a member of the Swiss Young Academy, was a very active board member of Agender, which is the European Organization on Gender Studies in Europe, in the recent past. And but you're still posting stuff on that list, no? I see that. And you can have conversations with her in German, in English, in French, whatever you want. She's currently working on a participative research project about capacity building for rainbow families in Switzerland and beyond. So we're very happy on behalf of the foundation to give you this award. And I have it here already. So. So, and this year we're extremely happy because we have ABC. No? I mean, we don't have it always so neatly alphabetical, but this year for sure we have. So this is Rosalind Kvagen. Coming to you from Scotland, from the University of Edinburgh. And she's an independent expert and research consultant and visiting researcher at the University of Edinburgh. You see this? After an award-winning dissertation, and there's patterns, you will hear that phrase again later also. That became the great book, Making Gender Equality Happen, Knowledge, Change and Resistance in Gender Mainstreaming. Rosalind encountered the precarious existence of postdoc life. They started with a postdoc in Nijmegen. She has since, see, Nijmegen is really, I mean, the Germans should really all learn how to pronounce that, right? She has since balanced earning a living based on consultancy research with cutting-edge research on the politics of knowledge, on economic governance and gender, and on feminist political economy. Largely unfunded, but not completely. Yeah. That's also a pattern. She has been teaching and she's advised the Scottish government, which is one of the better ones in Europe, no? So that you don't think she's advising the wrong people that don't listen to feminists. She's also a board member and trustee of the Scottish Women's Budget Group, one of the best in Europe. And she's co-founder of Women in Renewable Energy Scotland. Yeah? Yeah? No? Yeah? Okay. 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 She's an excellent speaker. You're not that too? No? 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 Okay. And a dedicated activist within the academic community to carve out more space for anti-racist engagement. That's you, no? Okay. So on behalf of the Flax Foundation, we're very happy to give you this award. Okay. You know, we didn't have a D or an E or an F, so we moved to the G. Sarah? Okay, this is Sarah Gabanoli. No need to ask where she's from, right? From Vatican country, she says, but based in Paris. Independent researcher affiliated to Paris 8 and to the University of Verona. So Sarah is a feminist and a sociologist committed to research at the crossroads of feminist theory, discourse analysis, and the sociology of social movements. So even without a solid academic position, in fact, she's doing all the scholarly work in her free time, she has a solid record of scholarly contributions. She has been involved for a long time already in research on anti-gender campaigns, first with attention to the Vatican, then increasingly also with far-right parties and actors, focusing often on her native Italy. Part also of a group of scholars and activists that are reanimating, to my great joy and pleasure, and that of many other people, I hope, the works of Monique Wittig and Colette Guillaumin. She's also played a crucial role in the diffusion of French research on lesbianism and materialist feminism in Italy through translation work. She's also publishing in Open Democracy on the racial and sexual boundaries of democracy. So that's why the Flax Foundation thought Sarah deserves Emma Goldman Award. So we hope you're very happy with it. Okay. Annalise. Okay, it would also have been. Well, I think there's no harm done. This was for using something with no? I don't know. I did that. The remote, no? We don't need it, no? Okay, put it somewhere. Yeah. Okay, Annalise. Annalise Kaiser Trujillo, no? Professor in Gender Studies in STEM at the University of Freiburg in Germany. So Annalise Kaiser is working against the grain of her disciplines of neurosciences and psychology, doing work that is hardly welcomed warmly, but is highly necessary to infuse those disciplines with more feminist critical thinking. Her innovative work is on gender, taking also class, race, ethnicity into account in showing the fractured nature of gender and sexualities. Academically, this is part of the pattern. She worked in various precarious positions in Germany and Switzerland. She is one of the founders of the network Neurogendering, Critical Studies of the Sex Brain with Isabelle Dussage since 2010 and still an active member of its steering committee. She's extensive teaching experience and organized workshops with fascinating titles such as molecular feminisms. So during the drinks and the food, you can ask her, what are molecular feminisms? Tackling the hegemonic neurobastion for all of us, we're very grateful for your work. And on behalf of the Flax Foundation, we have an award for you. Two more to go. Okay, Anna, it's your turn. Anna Miszkowska-Kajewska, independent researcher, also affiliated to the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. With an award-winning thesis, you had that before, right? Done at Amsterdam University that turned into the wonderful book Feminist Activism at War, unpacking common myths about feminist clashes in and around the war in former Yugoslavia. She has shown that she really masters the skills of critical thinking and sound scholarly historical analysis. Since then, she has mainly been back in her native Macedonia. sharing the fate of so many of her generation, hopping around, collecting precious, precarious, smaller job positions. Still, she managed to keep up the scholarly work too, publishing on opposition to feminist politics, abortion politics, divisions in times of COVID, LGBT activism, and doing some book reviews. Her guest lectures and talks target the scholarly, the professional, and the activist community alike. She has been here at the EBM as a junior fellow in 2018 and is still a very active feminist activist in Macedonia. Anna, on behalf of the Flax Foundation, enjoy your award. Okay, well, you know what your fate is if you're okay. Ingrid, a fellow Belgian. I mean, I'm an ex-Belgian. And you're probably not an ex-Belgian, or are you?
I accumulate citizenships.
Yeah, I tried that too. It didn't work. I always wanted to start a collection of nationalities, but that's not always possible, right? So Ingrid Robijns is at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, chair of ethics of institutions, and PI of an ERC consolidator grant called Fair Limits. And since her PhD in 2002 with Amartya Sen on gender inequality and capability perspective, she's broadened her attention to inequality and capabilities related to class, notably wealth, or being too rich, right? And ability, the ethics of autism, and climate change policy. She's finishing this ERC grant on fair limits. Can limitarianism be justified? Which involves a philosophical analysis of limits in the distribution of economic and ecological resources. So, to say it simply, is it morally okay to be rich? And her answer is, no, it's not. But, I mean, on this she also published a book in Dutch towards a wider audience called Rijkdom. As she argues, being rich is a moral problem on top of all the other problems that come with it. So she's a philosopher with a strong interest in feminist economy, class and ethics. She has over 250 blogs in a blog that she started in 2006 called Crooked Timber. And in the Netherlands, she's also very well known for her visible activism for better working conditions and the reversal of austerity measures at universities. And I think that's that type of recalcitrant that somehow at the Flax Foundation we seem to cherish or celebrate, and that many of you in one way or another are doing the stuff that is not always welcome but needed. And so as the last one, we hope you didn't have to wait too long. Now, before you came up, here's your award, and enjoy it. Yeah, okay, so that's the end of the official end. Yeah, we can buy a Google, buy Fabio, buy Nasta. We will see you some other time. And I want to close the ceremony, right? And because you said I was the whatever, no? I had to do that. And on behalf of the Institute, I can invite the people who are present here to go down to the cafeteria and enjoy some drinks and food and wonderful conversations. Because as you see, there is almost as much awardees as other people, so you will surely have a chance to talk and ask people like, I heard that you were introduced as, what is that? No? So we hope that that will function. We will put the information about the new awardees on the website soon, the names, and then the pictures and longer descriptions will be a bit later. So thank you to the Institute. Thank you to Nikki especially, but also to Sarah, who isn't here. And to Klaus. And the technicians behind the table. Thank you too. It all went very well. So maybe if the people who didn't get an award, instead of starting to cry, if you can go down already to the cafeteria, we will take some pictures with the awardees before those are allowed to go. You know, because we need those pictures, and it's part of like doing the embarrassing things of getting an award, that you have to then be a photo model for it on top of everything. So you have to bear with us. It comes with a thing, no? But the other people can already go down and start enjoying what is offered there, no? Yeah.